Well, if you looked at the facilities and the access to facilities that train drivers had, you'd think it was the 19th century, let alone the 21st century.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Walmer, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And this is a bit of a special episode as we are crossing continents for the first time, and I'm broadcasting from Tokyo, where I have been for a week. And with me, still in the UK, is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislations. So, Mark, what are we going to talk about today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. And the first time we're recording this from different continents, as you say, and in different time zones. You've certainly picked an interesting week to be out of the UK, because, of course, our top story is the big personnel change at the UK Department for Transport, where the Transport Secretary has quit and been replaced in the space of a few hours. So we'll be bringing listeners up to date with that, and also with our own observations on the new Transport Secretary. We will, of course, hear from you about your trip to Japan, and we'll be looking in particular detail at the Tokyo Metro, which you've been experiencing, and the high-speed network, mainline network in Japan, the Shinkansen network, which is the subject of the book that you're writing and the primary purpose for your trip to Japan. Later on, we'll be talking about matters much closer to home, and a campaign by train drivers union ASLEF to improve the toilet facilities for train crew. And then finally, en route to Japan, you dropped off in China, and you've got some thoughts on the maglev railway system there.
Yes, Mark. It's both very timely that I'm in Tokyo and very untimely, because I have a knack of being away when there's major transport stories. So, look, I'm going to bring you a lot of news about the Tokyo Metro, which is, particularly appropriate and fortuitous that I'm here, and it's fascinating. But I have missed the big transport story almost of the year, and you've been still in Britain, kind of looking at that. So, what exactly happened to Louise Haigh?
Well, let's just cast our minds back to the previous episode of Calling All Stations, where we reported on the very accomplished and confident appearance of UK Transport Secretary Louise Haigh at the House of Commons Transport Committee, where she, with her officials, had been discussing the work of the Department for Transport and the progress that they've been making since the general election in July on a range of transport policies, issues, and initiatives. Now, we fast forward just a few days, really, and we find that the Transport Secretary achieves perhaps the pinnacle of her period in office on Thursday, just gone, the 28th of November, when the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill received its royal assent. So particularly for listeners overseas, under the UK Constitution, that means it became law. It became an Act of Parliament. And so this was the first major piece of legislation to be enacted by the newly elected Labour government, taken through Parliament by Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary. So a major achievement for any British minister, and securing a place in history. On the very same day, in the great city of Leeds, Louise Haigh launched a consultation on an integrated transport policy for the UK. This is the first attempt to do something quite like this since the previous Labour government came to power in 1997. So a big initiative, a big step forward for Louise Haigh's policy agenda. And less than 24 hours later, she was gone. She had quit as Secretary of State. And so to say, a week is a long time in politics is probably an overstatement. It's more like a day is a long time in politics.
That was Harold Wilson, of course, who
yes,
we're
indeed.
both old enough to remember. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. And in our last podcast, we were praising her, saying, she'd done rather well in kind of the challenge of presenting her policies to the Transport Select Committee, and she seemed quite accomplished and on top of her brief. And despite one or two ups and downs, particularly when she got rebuked by Keir Starmer, having made remarks which actually were hardly controversial in a way, that P&O had behaved very badly over sacking all its staff on its cross-channel ferries. She had basically managed to get through legislation, which not every minister by any means ever manages to do. So, yes, what a strange kind of turn of events.
And of course, it was over a curious incident from long ago during a pre-parliamentary career, following an incident where, unfortunately, Louise Haigh very sadly was the victim of crime. And as listeners will probably know from the coverage, there was a problem related to a mobile phone which appeared to have been stolen, but then later turned out not to have been stolen. And this turned out through a convoluted process into a very, very minor criminal conviction, which had already expired from Louise Haigh's own criminal record. It had been spent. That is the correct expression. That's right. And yet, through some complexities of we're now being told the ministerial code, which governs the way that UK ministers are expected to behave, we found over the course of that very short period of a few hours that it was necessary for Louise Haigh to resign, and receiving tributes and plaudits from very many people, but nevertheless she returns. She continues, of course, to be a backbench Labour MP for her constituents of Sheffield Heeley, but has to serve in Parliament in that capacity now rather than a Minister of the Crown.
And she jumped, which is interesting, and jumped very quickly, which two things about. One is that it does leave her open to be reappointed. I mean, Peter Mandelson, for example, was once resigned and came back. Various other ministers have in the past gone and come back. And it seems that Keir Starmer, in his letter to her, which was a bit brief, which people commented on, but it certainly opened the possibility of that. But Mark, my journalistic instincts here have to come into play, and the story as she tells it is not really quite enough. And I think there's a bit more background to this that may or may not emerge, and may have been the reason why she went so quickly. It just seems a bit of a complicated story. That she says that it was, because she did fail to tell them that this phone had then been subsequently found. But, it doesn't strike me that that's enough to be a criminal offence, really. Is there something else? And obviously we can't really speculate on this, but I somewhat suspect that maybe more will emerge in the papers.
We can be absolutely sure that there are squadrons of tabloid journalists are doing their best to see whether there is anything more.
Absolutely. And Guido Fawkes and right-wing newspapers are kind of be hovering around this, for the next few days. We'll see what emerges. But look, in a way, it's a very sad story. Here is a young woman. She was the youngest ever female cabinet member. She seemed to be on top of her brief. I must say that I wasn't sure that she was engaging sufficiently with the rail industry. Certainly, that was a feeling amongst some of the people I talked to, that they were quite impressed with her, but they just didn't feel she was around enough, appeared enough at conferences, kind of engaged with people. And I presume this must be true in other aspects. Certainly, she did engage with the sustainable travel, active travel people. And certainly, she, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, she had spent a day with Chris Boardman, who's the boss of Active Travel England, and the former cyclist, and a fantastic fellow who has kind of done a lot for sustainable travel. And he seemed to have persuaded her of the importance of this. And then she got herself, they gave her a bicycle, an electric bicycle, to ride around Sheffield. And, she seemed to be impressed with that. And this integrated transport policy was also part of that. So she was certainly seemed to be on top of her brief. And now we have to start all over again.
Well, indeed. And the other side of the coin, of course, is that we now have a new UK Secretary of State for Transport appointed within about 8 hours, I think it was, of the resignation of Louise Haigh. So that new Secretary of State for Transport is Heidi Alexander, who had been serving as a minister in the Department for Justice and is the Member of Parliament for Swindon South. And although Heidi Alexander was only re-elected to Parliament at the general election in July, she's had a previously quite sort of illustrious career as a Member of Parliament, a member of the Shadow Cabinet, and then subsequently of particular interest, and perhaps part of her qualifications for securing the Secretary of State job, was that for some time, some years, in fact, she was the Deputy Mayor of London, responsible for transport under the leadership of Mayor Sadiq Khan. So Heidi Alexander brings a very kind of senior and serious experience of transport and a number of different transport modes into the role of Secretary of State. And in fact, you've had some dealings with Heidi, haven't you, Christian?
No, absolutely. I did when she was Deputy Mayor. I met her several times. And interestingly, like Louise, she was persuaded of the importance of sustainable transport and did ride her bicycle around Lewisham, where she was MP, and I think lived at the time before she became MP for Swindon. She was very engaged with that agenda. She had a very good reputation as Deputy Mayor for transport, and her expertise in the subject was such that I do remember the 2023 Labour conference, so the last one before the election. There were a lot of rumours flying about that she was being lined up for the transport job on the expectations that she would win Swindon South, where she's from, by the way, she's from Swindon, that she would win it and get back into Parliament. And there were rumours that she would actually be getting the Secretary of State for Transport job rather than Louise Haigh. But as you say, Keir Starmer put her in justice. Louise kept her job despite these rumours, and now she has been elevated to the Secretary of State job. And I must say, this is a great appointment. I'm really looking forward to meeting her again and hearing what she has to say. But I think she'll hit this agenda running. Rumours are that she's going to look at everything again, that, she's not going to just accept everything that's going on. But so, of course, there's all the important agenda of establishing Great British Railways, of continuing the sustainable travel agenda, let alone, issues in aviation and shipping and so on. There's all these important issues. And of course, HS2 hangs heavily over any new transport secretary. So it's certainly going to be a busy brief. But there couldn't have really been a better appointment. That somebody who has some experience in this. I mean, thank God. How many times, Mark, have we seen transport secretaries who arrived and they kind of have absolutely no experience of this. I remember meeting Philip Hammond and him taking me to his office in 2010 and saying, why can't they stop the trains from going through level crossings and allow the cars to go through first? Because there's lots of cars around Egham where I'm, where in my constituency, and they have to wait for these trains to go through, and it does, can't we change that? So Heidi Alexander is not going to be asking questions like that.
Christian, as listeners know, you are in Tokyo talking to us from that great city, and you've been using the metro. Tell us all about it.
Well, I mean, this is, as I said, a fantastic coincidence that Tokyo Metro it's in a consortium with another Japanese company, and of course led by Go Ahead. But nevertheless, clearly the thinking behind it must be that they can bring some expertise and help solve the problems of the Elizabeth line. But let me tell you, the system is so different here that there is going to be this massive culture shock on both sides. Anybody from the Elizabeth line who comes over here and looks at this system here, or anybody from Tokyo Metro who goes over to look at the system in London, they are incredibly different. So first of all, there's a matter of scale, right? Every day, some 20 million people use the rail system here. The various kind of suburban services and 13 underground lines, which include some deep lines as well as some surface lines. But it's just rush hour all the time without the rush, right? The incredibly disciplined people who kind of walk quietly to their huge stations. Just to put this in perspective, of the 20 busiest stations in the world, 18 of them are in Japan, right? There's only the Gare du Nord and another station that are not in Japan out of the top 20. So the numbers using the railways in Japan are just extraordinary. So it has a 30% market share for passenger kilometers compared with 8% in the UK. And so the Tokyo Metro basically, and it's the associated railways around Tokyo, are basically serving every day what London gets in a week. And the system is completely different. So every metro line has its own dedicated tracks. There's no kind of trains spinning off to High Barnet or Mill Hill East or Edgware from the same place, right? There's no kind of system like the Circle Line, which then has trains coming in from Hammersmith and trains spinning off to the District Line places like Upminster and so on, all that complexity, none of that. So the core of the line, the system, is the Yamanote Line, which is the equivalent of the Circle Line, which has about 30 stops on it. And it kind of links with all the other lines, and it runs every couple of minutes, largely on the surface. It goes in the odd tunnel here and there, but it's a surface line. And it just runs like clockwork. And I mean, and platform doors on most of the platforms, not all of them. And people, as I say, just don't run for the trains because they know there's another one coming through. And there is a very complex system of ticketing. So there's barriers everywhere. There's not many staff around. Now, here's a complexity compared to our system, which is that this is not one company running this. There's two different Tokyo Metro companies, a sort of one that's a consortium between the regional authority and the national government, and one that's entirely run by the national government. That's the one. The latter is the one that's going to be running, helping to run the Elizabeth line. And then there's also some private companies involved. So your ticket, the ticket that I buy most days for the JR lines, which are the majority of the lines, don't work on some parts of the underground. So you have to get another ticket and you have to transfer through these barriers with this ticket, and then you have to buy a different ticket. So this morning I went out to a suburban place called Futako Tamagawa, and where I changed a huge station called Sibaya, I had to buy another ticket. So that's all. Now most people have a stored value ticket like an Oyster card, where they just kind of flash it. The barriers don't close every time. They stay open the whole time, and only when there's a problem do they close. So that saves an enormous amount of time. And the barriers are long enough to ensure that they close in time to trap anybody going through. There's none of this jumping over the barriers that you see a lot in Paris and see occasionally in the UK, people pushing through the barriers and so on. It's totally law-abiding and kind of disciplined. And it's a quite extraordinary system. I mean, it just operates so efficiently. I mean, they have little notices up, electronic notices up in the trains about when things go wrong, and they kind of say so and so has slight delays on the line, and baggage stuck in door, right? And that is so unusual that they'll actually put that on this on the little electronic display, that there's a line that has been delayed slightly because there's baggage stuck in door, or inspection of train, this sort of thing. It just runs so smoothly that I haven't had a single delay, no kind of sorry, we're delaying the train here because of the signaling problem and so on. It's fantastically efficient. Now, it's quite old-fashioned as well. It's not kind of the most modern technology. So here's something interesting. Now, they're installing platform doors in lots of places to stop people kind of getting on the tracks and falling on the tracks. But they're doing it with pretty low technology. They're little kind of waist-height doors that kind of open and close with the doors of the train. So the trains have to stop in precisely the right place every time. But they're very basic. They're not kind of the sort of platform doors we have on the Jubilee line and indeed on the Elizabeth line, which kind of separate off the whole platform and reach up to the ceiling and so on. So these are kind of fairly basic and simple, but it's kind of the use of technology that that is not necessarily state of the art, but kind of is functional. And then the ticket machines are fantastically efficient. You put in kind of 1,000 yen, which is equivalent of £5. They're very cheap. The journeys are very cheap usually, but there's different prices for every journey, right? So if you don't have one of these cards, you have to look at the display and it tells you exactly how much you're paying. But you put in your 1,000 yen, and it gives you the change as one splurge. It doesn't kind of go tick tick tick, kind of issuing all the coins or your change. It just goes, and it all comes out as one go. It calculates it absolutely instantly. Here's your change. Boom, pick up the ticket. Boom, next person. And this seems to absolutely work, absolutely perfectly every time I've used it. Boom, and I've got used to it. I've become a Tokyo commuter. I've become all used to it. So there's so many differences that it will be a cultural shock both ways, but utterly fascinating. I hope maybe we'll get the opportunities to interview the people running the Elizabeth line a few months down the line to kind of discuss how they've found it and how they think that their expertise will help.
So let me just ask you a couple of things there from a kind of customer perspective. So, I mean, I've never been to Japan, and some of the impressions I have of using public transport in Japan are really ideas of very heavily loaded trains with uniformed gentlemen with white gloves sort of cramming passengers in before the doors close. Is there anything like that? Have you had any sort of experience of that?
I think I think that's rather like the view of Indian Railways with everybody hanging outside and sitting on the locomotives and stuff. That is the standard picture of it, and it's long, long gone, and it isn't quite like that, although they are very crowded. Indian trains are very crowded. And I'm going to India in February, so we'll report from there. So that's something for listeners to look forward to. But no, I think that's a rather old-fashioned view. That I think they've modernized it. I've seen no kind of gentleman with white gloves kind of pushing people onto the trains, and I've been on the deep tube lines at rush hour, and there was nothing like that. They're certainly crammed, but I think they've sorted out those capacity issues. They built lots of new lines. They continue to expand the system, and they seem to have dealt with that. So it's a very smooth process for passengers. I mean, everybody just goes through these barriers, barely without.
But these barriers, can I just pick you up, because you said the barriers are default open.
Yes.
Is that right? So how do they I would therefore think that you would need a lot of presence of uniformed staff to deal with antisocial behaviour and potential overcrowding issues and so on. But you said that the presence of uniformed staff was actually quite low.
Yes,
is it just because the Japanese people behave better?
Partly because
the
they
Brits?
but partly the barriers are 2 or 3 times the length, right? So the barriers are probably about 4 meters long, right? So, and the barrier is at the end. The gate is at the end. So if you try and get through, it snaps shut before you can get through, right? However fast, if you're even Usain Bolt, you wouldn't get through by the time it shuts. And the ticket, you put your ticket in. I mean, most people don't have a ticket. They just have these IC cards, which they kind of flash, or their telephone. They just flash their telephone at it. But because I'm using ticket.
So you're still presenting a ticket of some kind at the barrier,
but it goes through so quickly. It just goes instantly at the end of the barrier, which is, as I say, about 4 meters long. It just goes through so quickly. And if I, as happened to me, and this operates on the Shinkansen as well. It has happened to me. I had the wrong ticket. There was no way I could have got through the barrier. It kind of immediately stops you. I retrieved my ticket, and I then there was a uniformed person who then kind of helped me out. But that was on the Shinkansen. There aren't many uniformed people around. So when I had the wrong ticket on the metro, I then had to go to a little office and pick up. But the ticket offices are tight. They don't sell tickets. The offices don't. Sorry, they're not ticket offices. They're just little booths where they sort out problems and give you a bit of information.
Right.
But you have to get your ticket from a machine. You have to become adept at using these machines. They are in English. You press a button that says English. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. But you can.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it? Because I'm sure our machines aren't in Japanese. So
they certainly aren't. No, or any other language for that matter.
Yeah.
But they are only in English. Although some of them offer Chinese and kind of a few other languages as well. And you have to become adept at dealing with this. But as I say, they take in the notes. There's no issue with them. Nothing gets stuck. It kind of gives you the change instantly. I mean, it's fantastically efficient.
And no, you've mentioned, of course, the Shinkansen, Christian, there, and you're actually in Japan primarily to research your upcoming book on high-speed rail travel. And so can you give our listeners a taste of the Shinkansen experience?
Well, that's equally fascinating. I mean, as somebody who's been writing about railways for 30 years, I probably should have been here before, because it is a unique and fantastic experience. Of course, they've just celebrated the 60th anniversary of high-speed rail. They were the first high-speed rail. It was introduced in 1964, built in just 3 years, by the way. To go with the Olympics in 1964 to showcase really Japan. You can't exaggerate. Japan was completely destroyed by the war, and the cities were flattened. there's very few old buildings left in the major cities in Japan, and that's partly development, but partly because they were flattened by the war. So the Shinkansen was part of Japan emerging into the modern age, and it's an amazing system. So at the time, the railways were all nationalized with Japan National Railways. They had a very bad reputation. They had, lots of strikes. But Shinkansen was created as a separate railway. It's kind of also, it's a different gauge, right? The gauge is 3'6" in Japan with most of the railways. This was standard gauge, 4'8.5", deliberately so the Shinkansen can't run onto normal tracks without an extra rail being put there, which does happen in some instances. And it's so frequent, right? That Japan is ideal for high-speed rail, right? Because everybody, not quite everybody, but nearly everybody lives in the coastal region, mostly between Osaka. About 60% of the population lives between Osaka which is 500 kilometers away from Tokyo, and that's the main Shinkansen route. Although there's now 4 or 5 others that go to other parts of the country, and there's basically one every 3 or 4 minutes, right? Running, and it runs to a fantastic efficiency.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know, that's seconds of delay. They have up to 17 trains an hour on the tracks, which is actually the capacity they're trying to build HS2 to. But they you have to remember again, this is dedicated tracks. There's no trains spinning off the rest of the network, apart from right at the edges. Where there's less frequency. There's no kind of junctions. They stop at intermediate stations. There's 14 intermediate stations between Tokyo and Osaka, but they're all off the main track, right? So if trains are stopping there, they go off the main track, stop at that station, and rejoin it. They don't kind of stop on the tracks and get in the way of the through trains and so on. And that's all kind of programmed. I've seen the diagram. They still do a graph paper with diagrams of the trains and stuff, and how they cross over at certain places, and when there's a fast train going through rather than a slower train. So I mean, it's fantastically organized, and it's a slightly soulless experience. It must be said that it doesn't go through fantastically beautiful country, apart from, of course, the site of Mount Fuji, and there's a photograph of me and Mount Fuji will go on our website, I hope. But Osaka to Tokyo is almost one continuous town, right? I mean, it's just built up most of the journey. Low-rise housing, unlike in China, where all the housing is kind of high-rise and in this huge, comes on 40, 50-story high blocks. Here, most of the housing is low rise, and extends kind of very widely in these cities, which all have underground systems and fantastic local transit systems, and so the Shinkansen journey is not exciting in terms of scenery, and it's a very banal. The inside of the Shinkansens are quite old fashioned. They have a kind of look about them that is kind of the inside of aircraft in the 1960s. They're kind of, it's not kind of jazzy modern stuff. It's kind of very functional. The seats are perfectly comfortable. There is quite a lot of legroom. There is no catering, right? Famously, when these started, there were dining cars, and there were trolleys going through selling bento boxes. In fact, bento box was the way, which is a kind of meal in itself, with kind of little bits and pieces, some rice, some chopsticks, some bits of vegetable, and whatever. And they don't sell them on train. You have to buy your bento box before. But now here's again, and that surprising thing about Japan, it's very cheap. It's fantastically cheap. This whole idea that Japan is the most expensive place in the world is 10 years out of date. So the journey between Osaka and Tokyo, which is 500 kilometers, 70 quid, standard price. No dynamic pricing, right? Whatever time of day, it's 70 quid, right? Which is not bad for 500 kilometers. Obviously, there's first class, but as I say, no catering on board. So you bring your bento box. The bento box was 7 quid, right? And it was a meal. It wasn't a Pret sandwich that you still left you hungry, right? It was like a whole full meal with the chopsticks. Kept me happy for 20 minutes, kind of fiddling my way, eating this lovely food. 7 quid, right? The underground, a day's pass on the JR lines, not on all the lines, but with JR lines are the main lines, is 760 yen, which is basically £3.80, right? Everywhere. And you can use it for as many journeys as you want, so on. So Japan is incredibly cheap, and the transport is incredibly cheap. The government only sets the maximum fare. It doesn't kind of make these various companies have particularly low fares, but it does set a maximum fare and doesn't allow them to charge above that. And there's been very little inflation in this country over the years. In fact, there's been some deflation in some of the years. There's been not an enormous amount of economic growth. The prices have just stayed the same for a long time, and everything is fantastically cheap. So look, here's a bit of advice. I mean, if you want a cheap holiday with fantastic railways and fantastic scenery outside the kind of main towns, there's wonderful mountains, Mount Fuji, but also lots of other hills and places to go to visit Japan. And I'm not paid for by this. This is not advertising for Visit Japan. It's the fact that it is a fantastic country to visit. Absolutely fascinating. The only trouble is the jet lag, which I'm still suffering from after a week here.
For many of us who use public transport, and particularly the national rail system in Great Britain, one of the constant challenges is to find adequate toilet facilities, both on the train and on the station. But imagine if you're driving the train or working in some other capacity on the train, what kind of toilet facilities do you have access to? This is the theme of a new campaign from Train Drivers Union ASLEF. And Christian has been talking to the union's president, Dave Calfe, about their objectives.
I'm with Dave Calfe at the launch of what ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, sees a real gap in the kind of health and safety of drivers and indeed, I suppose, ultimately passengers. And it's a campaign about actually getting proper toilet and sanitary facilities for drivers. So, Dave, just tell me a little bit about what this campaign's about.
So this campaign's about that drivers don't go more than 4 hours without access to the appropriate welfare facilities, toilet facilities.
And is that not the case at the moment?
In many train companies, it's not. In many train companies, drivers can drive up to 6 hours, and in excess of 6 hours before they have diagrammed access to toilet facilities. Some of our freight drivers can be over 6 hours as well, sitting in loops where there are no facilities, and obviously the health implications that go along with that.
And is this really a serious issue? I mean, surely this is the 21st century.
Yes, well, if you looked at the facilities and the access to facilities that train drivers had, you'd think it was the 19th century, let alone the 21st century.
So what are the negative effects of this?
The negative effects is toxic shock syndrome for many of our women members. We will also have kidney issues for all members as well. As I've said before, the NHS recommend that you empty your bladder between every 3 and 4 hours, and we've picked the higher end of that, the 4 hours that drivers should have access to toilet facilities, so they don't have these health implications.
But wouldn't it be massive costs for the train operators to ensure that this is possible?
Well, the cost comes from what happens with an unhealthy workforce. That's the true cost, people's health and well-being, and that's what's at the heart of this. It's not a productivity issue, it's not an industrial issue as such, it's about the health and well-being of the people they employ. And there is an irony about for employers in the rail industry to say that, because many of the industry meetings we go to, they have a personal comfort break after 2 hours. So why should train drivers work in excess of 4, 5 and 6 hours before they get the comfort break?
But have you actually got evidence of drivers being adversely affected by this?
Well, we have our survey where we had over 3,000 replies of drivers giving examples of going to the toilet in lunch boxes, newspapers. Lucozade bottles is quite a regular occurrence. We had the unfortunate fatality of a driver at West Worthing where the RAIB and the ORR put an improvement notice on the company there at the time following that incident.
Because what happened to him?
He previously drivers would use bottles to go to the toilet. This is my understanding, and the company put a notice out telling him not to do that anymore. So the driver got down trackside and was struck by a train. And part of the RAIB recommendations was about putting in proper. That they'd failed. Sorry, the ORR said they'd failed to put in proper welfare facilities at that location.
So what specifically are you asking of the train operators?
Well, we're asking
Great British Railways or whatever.
Well, it's all operators, TOCs and FOCs, whomever the employer is. We want drivers to not drive for more than 4 hours without having a diagrammed access to toilet facilities, wherever those toilet facilities are on stations, depots, or sidings, as part of the health and well-being of their employees.
And would that require massive change in kind of current practice?
We don't think so. No. 4 hours is a very long time to be on duty before getting the appropriate break.
Right, and so what's the steps in your campaign? How are you going to go about changing this?
Well, to start with, this is obviously the launch of our campaign. We've spoken to the ORR, who couldn't make it today, who are going to organise a roundtable industry meeting to make improvements to welfare facilities, and we will bring the industry with us because our argument is strong.
You're going to work with the other unions on this?
Yes, if we need to.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dave. That's really interesting.
No, thank you, Christian.
So, Christian, that was an interesting insight into an issue that we British are still rather shy of talking about.
Yes, I think, it was a great one to raise, actually, because there are real issues, as Dave said there, about drivers having kidney problems as a result of that and so on. And I must say, just to go back to Japan, there are fantastic toilets everywhere here. They're always amazingly clean and open and wonderful, and they also have just an amazing toilet system. So amongst all the other things they have, they still have public conveniences, which virtually our towns and cities don't.
Here's Christian's final thought from the departure lounge.
Well, on my way to Tokyo, I stopped off at Shanghai for long enough. After a little bit of hassle, they let us out because it was 7 hours. It was this beautiful sunny day in Shanghai morning. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to test the maglev. And the maglev is operating from Shanghai Airport to actually a place in the middle of nowhere in the middle of Shanghai, which is not quite in the center of Shanghai, which is quite far off the center. So you have to take the metro there. But so I did that. And I must say, the maglev is an amazing piece of technology. It runs at 300 kilometers an hour. Now that's interesting because actually it's capable of 450 kilometers an hour, but it doesn't do that because it uses up too much energy. But it's a smooth experience, gets you to downtown amazingly quickly, and was kind of reasonably well used. But there is no way that this is economical. And indeed, they're building a maglev here in Tokyo that is going to stretch, I think, as far as Nagoya initially. It's about 100 miles. And that has hit huge difficulties because a mayor of one of the local authorities on the way kind of objected to it and said, well, you're going to take all our water. He stopped the project for several years. The mayor has now been ejected and replaced, and progress is kind of going ahead, but they won't give me a date as to when it's open. They wouldn't give me a trip on it because they say, well, we only do trips very occasionally, and there is a 35-kilometer section that's open. But honestly, I don't think that this is a technology that is ever going to be used widespread because it just costs so much. And the fact that the Shanghai maglev is running at 300 kilometers an hour instead of its maximum shows just how much energy it uses, despite the fact it's supposed to be something that doesn't use much energy because it has very little resistance. But keeping it up in the air clearly uses a lot of energy, and then propelling it forward uses yet more energy. So I loved it. I greatly enjoyed. Worth the trip, but it's not going to happen widely.
Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Christian Walmart, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do also follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is @AllStationsPod.